Thank you, and good afternoon. I'm Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, and I want to thank you for being here today as we take a major step forward in New York and set what I believe will become a national model in the fight against gun violence. I'm honored to be joined on stage by some of our key partners in the effort to curb the plague of gun violence, Rochester's Mayor Lovely Warren, our Police Chief Michael Simonelli, and Gary Mervis, Chair of the Project Exile Advisory Board, and I gather we have some others from Project Exile here with us, and along with some other important advocates against gun violence, Gary Pudup and members of New Yorkers Against Gun Violence, and Sharon Sattler LeBlanc from Moms Demand Action. And Everytown, also always happy to be joined by the head of my Rochester Regional Office, Ted O'Brien, who's here with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, since I took office, one of my top priorities has been to deal with the epidemic of gun violence that has touched the lives of far, far too many New Yorkers. Every day, more than 300 Americans are shot. Every day, 90 Americans die from gun violence. And every day, 7 of those Americans who die are just teenagers or even younger children. These statistics are true all over America, and they are very, very real right here in Rochester. I know the mass shooting on State Street back in February is still on people's minds. 25 bullets fired into a crowd over what appears to have been a dispute over money, 1 person dead, 7 injured. And tragically, stories and statistics like this have become all too familiar. But what, up until today, we really haven't known is where exactly the guns are coming from and exactly how criminals keep getting them. And that is why we're releasing this week Target on Trafficking, a first-of-its-kind multi-year analysis of guns recovered by New York law enforcement. New York State has long been a leader in keeping guns out of the hands of people who should not have them while protecting the rights of responsible gun owners. I'm very proud of the fact that here in New York I worked with New York's gun show operators, and uniquely among all the states we worked together to close the gun show loophole. You cannot get out of a gun show in New York State with a gun you didn't bring in without showing a receipt for a background check. But it's in spite of that effort and the good faith efforts of law enforcement, local governments, lawmakers, and responsible gun owners, our state continues to face a plague of gun violence. So a year ago, my office determined that we were going to drill down into this and try and answer the question, why and how are so many criminals getting guns, even though we have such strong gun laws in New York? And we didn't go about it with any preconceptions. We didn't deal with it emotionally. We weren't interested in anecdotal evidence. We wanted the data. We wanted the hard evidence to show how this is happening. So a little over a year ago, we made a major request for data from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives in Washington. We were the first and only state law enforcement agency in the country to request and be given comprehensive aggregate data tracking the state of origin of guns recovered from New York crime scenes. We got the data for a 5-year period from 2010 through 2015, and with this data we were able to analyze the details of nearly 53,000 guns recovered by New York law enforcement at crime scenes and analyze the trends and patterns across every region of the state. We broke the state up into 7 regions, from Rochester to New York City to Long Island to Albany, the Hudson River Valley. And it's important to know that we did this with some help from some members of my staff who have great expertise in working with big data. I confess to sometimes having to consult with my daughter just to move around on the internet, so I can't take credit for the technology behind this. But I urge all of you to get onto the website, and the site is listed on the sign here. We just wanted the facts. We wanted answers for New Yorkers, and we wanted answers for our colleagues in law enforcement who are trying so hard to deal with this plague of gun violence. And the big answer that we discovered is that the data makes clear that the dangers facing New Yorkers come from out of state. Our research found that 74% of all guns recovered by law enforcement at crime scenes, these are all crime guns, came from out of state. That's a rate that's more than twice the national average. And when you focus on handguns, which are the weapons of choice for gang members and most violent criminals, 86% of all handguns recovered at New York crime scenes came into New York from out of state. Now, the vast majority of these guns were originally sold in a handful of states with lax gun laws. The states that make up the so-called Iron Pipeline, Pennsylvania, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, and Ohio, which provides quite a few guns, particularly out in the Buffalo, Erie, Niagara region. We found that statewide, the trends varied significantly by region. Here in Rochester, you can see the statistics and the firsthand how the challenges we face, and start in many cases with states with lax gun laws. About 44% of the 4,500 guns recovered by police in Monroe County came into New York from out of state. Now that's lower than in other areas of the state, but Rochester leads the state in the percentage of low time to crime guns, meaning guns that move very quickly from a legal purchase to showing up at a crime scene. We create, and you can see it in our database, a gun trafficking index that looked at 3 specific data points. First of all, time to crime. If a gun is purchased and it shows up within, and this breakout here, in fact, shows that this guns recovered within 1 year of a legal purchase, and you can see that guns recovered in the first 3 years, that's an indication that the gun may have been bought to be trafficked. Second, the purchaser is not the same person who was caught with the gun. Very important. So you have a purchaser in one of these gun exporting states buying the gun. Within a year, it shows up in the hands of a different person who's a perpetrator caught at a crime scene. That's another data point. And the third is moving across state lines. So when you combine time to crime, the fact that the perpetrator is different than the purchaser, and that it crossed a state line, it makes it more likely that that is a gun that is trafficked. And now our law enforcement colleagues and our office will be able to focus in on what we believe to be a relatively small number of bad actors, gun stores whose guns show up over and over again in New York crime scenes, individuals who may be purchasing a lot of guns out of state. It also enables us to really hone in on specific areas of the state, parts of our state, that have particularly high rates of gun crimes. Just a single zip code in Rochester, 14621, accounted for 22% of all gun recoveries in the entire county. That's extraordinary. 2 other zip codes account for another 21% of recoveries. So all told, these 3 zip codes alone account for about half of the guns recovered at crimes in Monroe County. Now, the Rochester Police Department and our other colleagues in law enforcement is doing amazing work trying to fight this epidemic. We now have a tool to enable us to focus in much more on the source of the guns and to try and shut down this supply line to New York's criminals. The data makes clear that each region has its own challenges, which is why we broke the state up into 7 regions. And it's important to understand that because of restrictions that are placed on the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms by Congress, we can make available to the general public information so you can see where the crime guns were and know what state they came from. For law enforcement, and current rules prohibit us from sharing this with anyone other than law enforcement, for law enforcement, we're going to be able to get the name of the purchaser of the gun and of the gun store that it originated at. So we'll be able to really move from trying to fight this epidemic with a blunt instrument of complaining about states we know have lax gun laws to targeting specific actors, and it completely demolishes the argument that gun laws don't work. What this tells us is that New York's gun laws do work. When 86% of the handguns used in crimes in New York come from other states, that tells you that most bad guys aren't even trying to buy a gun in New York. They know they have to get a permit if they do, and they're just going to people who are trafficking guns in from out of state. So our tracing analytics platform, which is available on this site, is a great tool for lawmakers, for local governments, for law enforcement, and for community leaders and activists to help hone in on the true nature of the problem and give us the data we need to rebut every phony argument that's made against stronger laws to stop gun trafficking. Now, many New Yorkers are already working hard on this fight. My office has partnered with state and local law enforcement many times to crack down on gun trafficking. Our organized crime task force has taken hundreds of guns off the streets and broken up dozens of gangs that trafficked in drugs and guns. We've also worked with local governments on gun buyback programs, which have taken in about 1,200 guns across the state. And as a matter of fact, we have a buyback scheduled for this Saturday right here in Rochester from 9 a.m. to noon at Full Gospel Tabernacle Church, 614 Clifford Avenue. And we urge anyone with an unwanted gun, bring it in. A gun lying around is a gun that could fall into the wrong hands, or a gun that could end up being used by someone in a tragic accident. We are taking an all-levers approach to this problem, and I'm proud of the fact that today we take another major step. We've worked with companies like Facebook to take illegal online gun ads down, and as I noted earlier, we're very proud of the work we've done to close the gun show loophole here, and I do believe this is going to become a national model for other states, and I think that this gun tracing platform is going to also become a model for other states. As I said, there are many activists, many good lawmakers, partners in local government and law enforcement who are working hard on this problem. But our report also includes some recommendations that will make it even easier for us to end the epidemic of gun violence. First, the federal government really has to require universal background checks. If you look at the statistics and look at the data we're presenting today, it is clear that background checks are effective. You have to close the gun show loophole. Right now, 40% of gun sales in America do not require a background check. It's just too easy for someone who should not have a gun to get a gun. Second, the federal government has to make gun trafficking a crime. Believe it or not, there is currently no federal law prohibiting gun trafficking. There are federal statutes that have sometimes been used by prosecutors to go after gun traffickers, but there is no comprehensive law that criminalizes each stage of illegal gun trafficking. Our own U.S. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is sponsoring a bill to do just that. Congress should pass this legislation in the coming session, and the data that we are presenting provides powerful ammunition, if you will, for the argument that we can and should do that. Third, the federal government should end these restrictions that Congress has imposed on the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. They have prevented local law enforcement from getting information like this. We had to jump through a lot of hoops to get this data. The folks at ATF were great partners. The New York office were very helpful. It's not that they don't want to get the data out there. It's that they're laboring under these limits that were imposed by Congress. But right now, as I mentioned, the real granular data of the purchaser of the gun, the specific gun store, that can only be shared with law enforcement. Policymakers should be able to see this too. So we urge Congress to lift those restrictions. And at the state level, all states should require handgun owners to get a permit. It is clear that our permitting process works. When one candidate for president said, well, gun laws don't work because Chicago has tough gun laws, but there are a lot of shootings, this data destroys that argument. This data shows that most bad guys are not even trying to buy guns in New York State. They know that they can't get them. They know that if they want a handgun, they have to go to a gun trafficker. If other states followed our lead, it would be a major step forward. And whatever they do, I'm also urging our state legislature to pass the Gun Kingpin Bill, which would impose severe penalties on anyone who traffics guns in New York State. The bill would mean anyone who sells more than 20 illegal guns could be sentenced to up to 25 years to life in prison. If you sell 20 illegal guns, this is not something that a casual, responsible gun owner would do. That means you're involved in the trafficking business, and we should have penalties that reflect the seriousness of that crime. The bill is sponsored by Assemblymember Amy Paulin and Senator Jeff Klein. Let's pass it this session and send a message to traffickers that it's not worth it to try and do business in our state. Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes we are all, and I know this resonates strongly here in Rochester, overwhelmed and discouraged by the tragedies of gun violence, but now we have a set of tools and data to enable us to fight back in a way that we never have before. New York is leading the way, in many respects, this database that we're making available online today, and we have been, we've done a webinar already to show people how to use it. Members of my staff are meeting with police departments around the state. I think there's going to be a meeting scheduled later today with the Rochester PD. But the data makes it clear that no state can fight this crisis alone. We need stronger gun laws in other states. We need the federal government to get over its gridlock and take action on this epidemic that's facing our nation. Today we take a major step forward, and the rest of the nation should follow our lead. So I now want to turn the microphone over to a great partner in this fight and someone who I know feels very personally, strongly about this, and great to be here in your beautiful city, Rochester Mayor Lovely Warren.
I truly want to thank the Attorney General for his leadership. I don't care what the issue is, where we're talking about zombie houses or illegal guns. We have a great partner in the state who understands what our community and our cities are facing. You know, we don't have to go a significant period of time without knowing that someone in our community has been shot. This new database helps our law enforcement be able to track this, get information that they critically need to fight against crime that's happening here in our community. Everyone knows that for me, gun violence is very, very personal. You know, being in the second grade and my grandfather being shot, I know what families feel. I know how tragic it can be. I have held many community members' hands and given hugs. And, you know, one thing that we can't do, we can't build a wall around our state. What the Attorney General is talking about is the fact that other places that do not have the laws that we have are making it easier for criminals in our community to access guns. And we have been able to, and he has been able to prove that by the data. And now that we know that, what are we prepared to do about it? And I think that is very, very important, because there's some things that the state needs to do, and there are some things that definitely our federal government needs to do in order to keep our entire country safer. And so I want to thank him for his leadership. I also want to thank Chief Simonelli and his team for fighting this every day. And sometimes the weight does get hard. You know, it gets heavy, I should say. And you're going in the right direction, but you feel like every time you take 2 steps forward, something happens and you're a step back. But we have to continue to press the issue that we want a safer community, and we want to hold those people that are committing these crimes in our community accountable. Being able to know where these guns are coming from, being able to see if it's when it's a trafficker and a point of contact that this weapon has been purchased, is going to be great for us to be able to know when we access these guns that the state is putting them in a database, and then they can track it across the state of and how many of these guns purchased at these points of interest are actually impacting urban communities or communities across the board. And so again, Attorney General, I really want to thank you for your leadership. I want to thank you for this database. I know that the chief and I was talking earlier about how this is going to help them in their ability to fight crime right here at home. And we appreciate all of your support, your team's support in working with us as we try to make Rochester a safer, more vibrant community. Thank you.
Thank you. And now a great colleague in law enforcement and someone whose partnership we greatly value, Rochester Police Chief Michael Simonelli.
Thank you. I'd like to add my thanks to the mayors, to the Attorney General for his leadership, and his team for doing this very worthwhile project. You know, I look at this not only from a policy perspective, but, you know, we're committed to preventing violence. And this data may be very valuable to us, and we're really excited to get our hands on it. And one of the things I was explaining to the mayor is we don't have the means to compile the data like this electronically. So we really hope that this is going to give us some insights again, not only on a policy level, but how we can work better and smarter to try to prevent violence and to prevent these guns from getting into the hands of criminals. So once again, I do thank the Attorney General and his staff, and we look forward to meeting with them and really diving into this data. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Thank you, and with that, we'll take some questions. Amy, if you'll just identify yourself and your outlet and ask away.
I don't know if you want to talk or the mayor or the police chief, but we've seen obviously a rash of violence here. We've had a mass shooting, we've had the murder, we've had a lot of things going on. Is there any way you can put in perspective how many of those may be linked? I know you mentioned the February crimes, but is there any way to know how many other of these crimes, some of the other murders are linked?
Sure. This program enables you to go find a specific crime gun, a specific perpetrator, and find out who originally purchased the gun, when they purchased the gun, and where they purchased the gun. So we will be able to, working with our colleagues in law enforcement, identify individuals. If there's someone who purchased a gun that ended up in one crime scene in a 5-year period, doesn't sound like a real gun trafficker. If you have someone who bought 50 guns that end up within a 3-year period at New York crime scenes, that's someone we want to know about, and we can now are in a position to identify those individuals and to identify particular gun stores whose guns end up at crime scenes. We now have the granular data that we've never had before to find these links and determine if there's one person or one gun store that is linked to several different crimes in a particular area.
Can you speak to the crimes themselves, Chief or Mayor Warren? I know we've had a lot locally.
Well, let me say this, and that's a great question, and here's the way I look at it. You know, even if these crimes aren't linked directly, if there's a common gun source of these illegal guns, that gives us some insight to attack the problem at a different level than we are now. So it's one thing, yeah, we have a serious crime, we make an arrest, we recover guns, and that's good, we need to do that, but again, we'd rather prevent the crime. And what this data may be able to help us do is, again, see if we can identify the source of the guns that are coming in here, and then work with our partners at the state and federal level to try to come up with a better strategy to prevent these guns. If removing the instrumentality of the crime before the crime may prevent some shootings.
You do find them quite often, don't you, though, in these recent murders? Oftentimes it's tied to an illegal gun?
Very often, you know, and we've had different situations here. The drive-by shooting at the Boys and Girls Club, those guns were lawfully possessed, and they were stolen in a burglary. You know, so we've had other guns that have come in from out of state. You know, so again, to the extent that we can identify a pattern of gun trafficking or a common gun source that we can turn our sights on, I think this gives us another weapon to attack the problem.
And it's important to emphasize that all we're looking at are crime guns. Every one of these guns, it's almost 53,000, were found at a crime scene. They're crime guns. We're not looking at any gun held by a sportsman, responsible gun owner. It's only crime guns. And we're now able to deal with 2 crimes. The actual burglary or shooting is one crime, but the gun trafficking that got that gun into the hand of the perpetrator is in and of itself a separate crime, and up until now we've not had the information we needed to attack that set of crimes. Now we do. Okay, thank you very much.